My name is Madeline Parker, and before I tell you who I am today, I need to start with the moment that changed everything. The night I realized my own family didn't see me as a daughter, they saw me as a bank account. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, or like you had to buy your place at the table, then you'll understand the ache I've carried for years. And before we go further, I'd love to know, have you ever experienced a moment when your family's love felt conditional? Leave me a comment, and let's see how many of us share this silent wound. And while you're here, make sure to like this video and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. I grew up in a household that looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard, was a bank manager in San Francisco. He wore crisp suits that cost more than my rent now, and people looked at him as the kind of man who had built a respectable, stable life. My mother, Margaret, was an accountant. She measured the world in neat, balanced columns, and in her eyes, appearances mattered as much as numbers. If our house was spotless and our clothes impeccable, then our lives, by extension, must be flawless too. And then there was my sister, Victoria. At 39, she embodied everything my parents valued: prestigious law school, partnership at a Los Angeles firm, a marriage to a surgeon, and 2 children who looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. At every holiday dinner, Victoria's accomplishments filled the conversation. There was always another case won, another award, another reason to admire her. Where did that leave me? I was the second daughter, the one who didn't follow the carefully drawn path. I chose art school instead of law, creativity over security. At 34, I had carved out a career as a freelance graphic designer in Portland. I lived in a small but cozy apartment in the Pearl District, with exposed brick walls that reminded me of both my independence and the risks I had taken. My income wasn't steady, but I made it work. I was proud of what I had built. But pride didn't count at our family table. To my parents, I was the wild card, the one who strayed too far, the one who could have been more. Conversations at home always circled back to achievement: Victoria's wins, Andrew's surgeries, the children's private school awards. When it was my turn, my stories of murals, branding projects, or local exhibitions were met with polite nods. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, with the kind of smile that made clear she thought of it as a hobby, not a career. It was in that silence, the pause after they asked what was new with me, that I felt the weight of being different. I wasn't the daughter they could brag about. I was the example of what not to do. And yet, I still craved their approval. I wanted so badly to belong at that table, to feel like my voice mattered as much as my sister's. I didn't know then that life was about to hand me something that would flip our entire family dynamic upside down. Something that would change me, and them, forever. Because the truth is, one moment of luck would transform me from the overlooked daughter into something else entirely: the Parker family's personal ATM. And that's where my story really begins. I remember the exact moment my life shifted, though at the time it felt so small it could have passed unnoticed. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. I was running late, juggling my laptop bag, my sketchbook, and a lukewarm cup of coffee as I dashed into the corner cafe near my apartment in Portland. My hair was still damp from the shower, my inbox already buzzing with client requests, and I felt the usual weight of a freelancer's day pressing on me, half excitement, half anxiety. That was when I saw it. A bright lottery display sitting right by the register, gaudy colors shouting promises no sane person would believe. I rarely bought tickets. It always felt like tossing money into the wind. But for reasons I still can't explain, I slipped a bill out of my wallet and asked for one quick pick. The barista laughed and said, "Who knows? Maybe today's your day." I laughed with her, folded the ticket into my jacket pocket, and walked out without another thought. 2 days later, standing barefoot in my kitchen, with the news humming in the background, I pulled out the crumpled ticket and compared it to the winning numbers. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. My eyes darted back and forth, my fingers trembling. When the realization hit, my knees nearly buckled. I had won. Not millions, not the kind of jackpot that makes headlines, but $200,000. For me, it might as well have been the moon. I slid down onto the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, clutching the ticket like it might evaporate if I let go. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For years I had been scraping by, carefully juggling bills, rationing every freelance check between rent, student loans, and equipment that always seemed to break at the worst possible time. And now, in an instant, I was free of that grinding fear. The first thing I did was pay off every last cent of my student loans. The relief was indescribable, like shackles snapping open. I cleared my credit card balance, built an emergency fund, and invested in a powerful new computer, a camera, and design software I had always envied but never afforded. For the first time since leaving art school, I wasn't drowning. I was floating. I could breathe. I told myself I would keep the news to myself. It was mine, my little miracle. But keeping secrets in a family like mine is a fragile thing. At a dinner not long after, my father noticed my smile, the lightness in my step. "You look different, Maddie," he said, narrowing his eyes across the table. "Less worried. What's going on with you?" I should have lied. I should have said I landed a big client, or that I'd finally gotten the hang of meditation. But I was tired of feeling like the disappointment, tired of shrinking. So I told them the truth. Just a sentence. "I had some good fortune recently. I won the lottery." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My sister's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My mother's eyes widened, calculating. My father leaned forward as though he hadn't heard me right. When I repeated it, $200,000, the room shifted. At first, there were smiles, laughter, congratulations. But I felt the undercurrent, subtle but unmistakable. It was as though I had been recast in a new role right there at the dinner table. No longer the underachiever, no longer the black sheep. I was something else now, a resource. The first request came from my father. His car had given out. He needed something reliable for his commute. "Just a small loan," he promised. "7,000. I'll pay you back when the year-end bonus comes." I didn't even hesitate. Family helps family, I thought. I transferred the money. Months later, the bonus came and went. Repayment was never mentioned. When I brought it up gently, he sighed, eyes heavy with disappointment, and said, "We paid for your education, Maddie. Family doesn't keep score." The second came from Victoria. Lily, my niece, had been accepted into a prestigious summer camp for gifted children. Tuition was $4,000. She and Andrew were saving for a vacation and couldn't spare it. "It would mean so much to her," Victoria said, her voice honeyed but firm. "And it's not like you have kids to spend on." I wrote the check. Then my mother wanted to renovate the kitchen. Then my nephew needed a new laptop. Then Andrew came to me with an investment opportunity that would be a shame to pass up. Each time I told myself it was fine, that it was family, that this was how families supported each other. But each time the numbers grew larger, and the pretense of repayment grew smaller. Something shifted in the way they treated me. Invitations multiplied. Suddenly, I was included in every family gathering, every group chat. My phone lit up with constant messages. At first I thought, finally, they see me. Finally, I belong. But the pattern was too clear to ignore. Affection bloomed whenever my wallet opened. Gratitude soured into expectation. It wasn't the money itself that hurt. It was the way their tone changed, the way their eyes flicked toward me at dinners whenever a bill arrived, the way Victoria teased about Madeline's lucky streak. I became useful. Not loved, not cherished, useful. Still, I clung to the illusion. For someone who had always been the outsider, even conditional love felt better than none. I told myself that this was progress, that they were finally including me. I ignored the sting when my professional successes went unnoticed, overshadowed by Victoria's courtroom triumphs or the children's trophies. I told myself I was building bridges, buying closeness, proving my worth. But deep down, I knew. I knew their affection had been purchased, not earned. And the truth is, once you buy something, people come to expect it again and again. That expectation grew heavier with every passing month, pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shake. And though I couldn't see it clearly yet, I was already being pushed toward a breaking point, one that would come sooner and more painfully than I ever imagined. Because when my parents' 30th wedding anniversary arrived, and I showed up with what I thought was the perfect gift, I would discover just how far their sense of entitlement could go, and just how invisible my love really was to them. When the invitation arrived for my parents' 30th wedding anniversary dinner, I felt something inside me stir that I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It wasn't just another family dinner. This wasn't a birthday or a holiday where the comparisons and subtle digs flowed as freely as the wine. This was a milestone, a moment that carried weight, the kind of event that might allow me to show up differently. For once, I wanted to contribute in a way that wasn't measured in dollar signs but in meaning. My mother's voice on the phone was casual, almost perfunctory, when she told me they had booked the French Laundry in Napa Valley. She spoke of it the way one might mention a grocery list item, as if the restaurant wasn't one of the most exclusive dining experiences in the country, as if securing a private room there wasn't a feat in itself. For them, it was obvious. Only the best would do. For me, hearing it set off a storm in my chest. I wanted to be there, not just in body but in spirit, to stand beside my parents and honor what they had built. I decided that if there was ever a chance to bridge the gap between us, this was it. I threw myself into planning my gift with the kind of dedication most people reserve for their wedding day. I spent nights scrolling through forums, reading articles about meaningful anniversary gifts, researching symbolism, engraving, presentation. I wanted something that was thoughtful, something that showed I had listened to them, absorbed their lives, understood who they were beyond their roles as mother and father. Finally, I landed on it, matching Apple Watches. Not because of the brand name, but because I remembered how many times my parents had spoken about wanting to be more active. They had joined a gym but rarely went, and my mother often joked about how my father needed someone to remind him to take his daily walks. This was perfect. Modern, useful, personal. I went further, having the watches engraved with their wedding date. I set up their profiles, added their favorite fitness apps, even programmed reminders based on their schedules. It wasn't just a gift. It was a gesture, a way of saying, I know you, I see you. When the boxes arrived, sleek and white with the weight of something valuable inside, I felt a rush of anticipation. I wrapped them carefully in silver paper, tied them with satin ribbons, and wrote cards in my best handwriting. The words I wrote were raw, vulnerable, thanking them for their 30 years together, acknowledging the family they had built, flaws and all. I tucked those cards under the ribbon and set the box on my nightstand where I could see it every evening before bed. But it wasn't just about the gift. I wanted to present myself differently that night. I splurged on a navy blue dress, elegant and understated, the kind of outfit I imagined Victoria would choose for herself. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced smiling, practiced the toast I had written. I told myself, this is the night you show them who you are, not just the daughter with a fluctuating income or the accidental lottery win, but a woman who can stand tall in their world. I rehearsed every detail in my mind, arriving on time, greeting them warmly, slipping into conversation with grace, presenting the gift at just the right moment, delivering my toast with sincerity. I imagined their faces softening, their arms pulling me in for an embrace, their words finally of approval. For the first time in years, I let myself believe in that possibility. In the days leading up to the dinner, I was electric with nervous energy. At work, I found myself distracted, sketching not designs but snippets of imagined conversations with my parents, rewriting the evening in my head over and over until it ended the way I wanted. I even called my mother one evening to ask what color dress she was wearing. It was a small question, but I wanted to show I cared about the details, wanted to match the elegance of the night. She laughed and told me she hadn't decided yet, her voice breezy, but I held on to the fact that she answered it all. The morning of the dinner, I woke with a sense of anticipation buzzing under my skin. I ironed my dress twice, laid out my shoes, rehearsed my toast again, and carefully placed the silver-wrapped box in my bag. As I looked around my apartment one last time before leaving, I caught sight of the sunlight streaming through the window and thought, this is it. This is the turning point. Driving out of Portland toward Napa Valley, I replayed everything in my head. The years of being the outsider, the moments when my achievements had been dismissed, the laughter at my expense when money became the only measure of my worth. I thought about how much I still loved them despite all of it, how much I wanted to heal. That night wasn't just about them, it was about me finally being seen. I told myself that if I showed up with my best self, dressed well, gift in hand, heart on display, things could change. Families shift, dynamics evolve. Maybe 30 years of marriage for my parents could mean a new chapter for me too. The road stretched out before me, long and winding, the sky heavy with clouds threatening rain. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my chest full of hope and fear in equal measure. I whispered my toast to the rhythm of the tires against the pavement, the words steadying me like a mantra. But as the clouds began to break open above me, spilling rain across the windshield, I had no idea that the real storm waiting for me wouldn't come from the sky at all. It would come from behind the closed doors of that private dining room, where every ounce of hope I carried would be tested in ways I never saw coming. And as I drove closer to Napa, the silver box resting on the seat beside me like a promise, I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner was going to define not only my relationship with my family, but also who I was willing to become in their eyes. By the time I pulled onto the freeway that evening, my heart was pounding with the kind of nervous excitement I hadn't felt since I was a teenager before prom. The silver-wrapped gift sat neatly on the passenger seat, ribbons catching the faint glow of the dashboard lights. My navy blue dress smoothed under my seatbelt, heels tucked neatly at my feet for when I would finally step into that polished dining room at the French Laundry. I kept telling myself, "You're early enough. You'll make it in time. This is going to be the night that changes everything." But life has a cruel way of testing even the best-laid plans. As I crossed into the Bay Area, the sky turned the color of iron. What began as a drizzle quickly grew into a relentless downpour. Sheets of rain slammed against my windshield, and the rhythmic swish of the wipers barely kept up. Headlights blurred into smeared streaks, brake lights bled red across the asphalt, and every car around me seemed to crawl in frightened unison. My hands clamped onto the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I whispered a steady chant under my breath. "Don't be late. Please, don't let me be late." Then traffic screeched to a stop. Up ahead, the faint flicker of blue and red lights splintered through the storm. Word spread quickly as drivers rolled down windows to exchange updates. "Pile up," someone shouted over the rain. 3 cars, bridges blocked. The Golden Gate Bridge, a place I had driven across countless times, was now frozen. I could see the silhouettes of officers weaving through stalled lanes, the glow of flares reflecting off wet pavement. Some drivers turned off their engines altogether, resigned to waiting. The sound of rain filled the silence, punctuated by the occasional frustrated horn. I reached for my phone immediately. First, I dialed my mother. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried my father. Nothing. Victoria. Silence again. My chest tightened as I typed a quick message into the family group chat. "Traffic accident on the Golden Gate. I'm stuck but on my way. Please don't start without me." The gray check marks appeared beneath it. Delivered. But no reply came. Minutes crawled into half an hour. My leg bounced nervously against the floorboard. I glanced at the clock, over and over, watching the digits climb mercilessly forward. Every tick felt like another nail sealing me into failure. The storm outside seemed to mirror the one inside my chest. Each raindrop against the windshield a reminder of how little control I had. At one point, I lowered the visor mirror and caught sight of myself. My hair was frizzing from the humidity, strands clinging stubbornly to my cheeks. My eyeliner had smudged slightly, the careful confidence I'd painted on that morning already dissolving. I dabbed at it with a tissue, forcing a shaky smile. "It's fine. You'll still make it. They'll understand. It's an accident. No one can blame you for this." Yet, deep down, I knew my family's history. I could already hear my mother's voice, tinged with disapproval. You should have left earlier. My father's sigh of disappointment, my sister's smug shrug. They had always been quicker to criticize than to forgive. By the time traffic began inching forward again, I was already nearly an hour behind schedule. I pressed harder on the gas, though the rain made it impossible to move quickly. Each mile closer to Napa was a battle between my hope and the gnawing dread that I was already too late. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway of the French Laundry, my pulse was thrumming so loudly it drowned out the rain. The restaurant, elegant and glowing with warm light, looked almost surreal against the storm outside. I grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat, smoothed down my dress with trembling hands, and dashed toward the entrance beneath the flimsy cover of my umbrella. By the time I reached the door, my hair clung damp to my forehead, my heels clicking against the stone walkway in uneven rhythm with my racing heart. Inside, the maitre d' greeted me with a polite but knowing smile. "The Parker party?" he asked. I nodded breathlessly. He hesitated, his expression softening. "They've already been served dessert. The private room is this way." The words sliced through me. Dessert. They hadn't waited. They hadn't even stalled for a few minutes to see if I would appear. I forced a smile, murmured thanks, and followed him down the hushed hallway. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing louder than the last, like a drumbeat of dread. As I neared the door, muffled laughter filtered through. The kind of laughter that fills a room where everyone feels at ease, included. I paused, gripping the handle tighter than necessary, taking one deep breath before stepping inside. The sight that met me froze me in place. There they were, my parents, my sister, her husband, their children all gathered around the glowing table, plates littered with the remnants of the evening's courses, wine glasses half full. My aunt and uncle sat comfortably among them. Everyone looked relaxed, satisfied, mid-conversation. My chair stood empty, its pristine place setting, the only sign I had ever been expected at all. No one noticed me at first. For a handful of seconds, I stood there dripping rainwater, clutching the silver-wrapped gift like a lifeline, watching them share something I had been excluded from. The sound of forks scraping against porcelain, the flicker of candlelight on their smiling faces, the casual intimacy of it all, it felt like walking into a party I hadn't been invited to. Finally, my nephew spotted me. "Oh, Aunt Mattie's here," he announced flatly before returning his attention to the last bite of chocolate cake on his plate. Heads turned slowly. My mother's expression shifted from laughter to something cooler, restrained. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her voice carrying that familiar undercurrent of judgment. "We thought maybe you weren't coming at all." There was no, "We were worried," no, "I'm glad you made it safely." Just the subtle accusation, the implication that my lateness was a choice, not the result of a pileup on a bridge in a storm. I opened my mouth to explain about the accident, the police lights, the traffic jam that had trapped me like a prisoner, but the words stuck in my throat. Because what I saw in their eyes wasn't relief at my arrival. It was inconvenience, as though my presence had interrupted the flow of their celebration rather than completed it. And in that moment, standing in the doorway with rain-soaked hair and trembling hands, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would always arrive late in their story. I forced a smile, stepped forward, and pulled the gift from my bag. The weight of it seemed heavier now, as though it knew what was waiting for me in that room. And though I didn't realize it yet, what happened after I set that gift on the table would shatter whatever fragile hope I had left for us. It was the moment the mask would slip, and I would finally see the truth of how my family really saw me. The moment I stepped into that private dining room, I knew I was already on the outside. Laughter rippled across the table, silverware clinked against porcelain, and the soft glow of candlelight illuminated the satisfied faces of my family. Their plates were nearly bare, streaked with sauces from courses I'd missed, crumbs from bread baskets I hadn't touched. My chair sat at the far end, untouched, its napkin folded neatly as if mocking me for believing I had a place there at all. I forced my smile into place, the one I had practiced in the mirror. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I crossed the room, the gift bag in my hand like a fragile promise. I reached the table and murmured, "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad." My voice felt smaller than I intended, swallowed by the space. My father gestured vaguely toward the empty chair. "Sit down. We'll see if the kitchen can make you something quickly." His tone carried no warmth, no acknowledgement of what I'd endured to get there. Just efficiency, as if I were another guest arriving late to a meeting. As I slid into my seat, I noticed the table had already been cleared of appetizers. No one had ordered anything for me, though they all knew my usual truffle pasta, the dish I had eaten at this restaurant since I was a girl. I tried to shake off the disappointment, and told myself the night wasn't over yet. I still had my gift. I still had my toast. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the silver-wrapped box, my handwritten cards tucked neatly beneath the ribbon. "I wanted to give you this," I said, pushing it gently toward my mother. For a moment, the room hushed, eyes settling on the box. My mother's fingers worked delicately at the ribbon, unwrapping it as though politeness required it. Inside, the matching Apple Watches gleamed under the soft light. "Oh, these are very nice," my father commented, lifting one briefly before setting it back down. I leaned forward, eager, explaining how I had engraved their wedding date on the backs, how I'd already set up their favorite apps, how it could remind them to take walks together. For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw genuine appreciation in their eyes, but it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. My mother closed the box, slid it to the side, and turned back to her wine. The silence hung heavy until my niece's voice cut through it. "Wait until you see what Aunt Victoria and Uncle Andrew got them," she piped up, her 11-year-old enthusiasm carrying across the table. Victoria smiled, her manicured hand sliding an envelope across to my parents. Inside were first-class tickets to Maui, a week at the Four Seasons, all expenses paid. The reaction was immediate. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. My father clapped Andrew on the shoulder with pride. They stood to embrace Victoria, laughter and exclamations filling the air. "This is incredible," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. For the next 15 minutes, the conversation circled entirely around Hawaii, where they would dine, which beaches they would walk, which excursions they should plan. My gift sat forgotten on the corner of the table, its silver paper now dulled by indifference. I sat there quietly, stirring the dessert someone had belatedly placed in front of me. Chocolate mousse, rich and decadent, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. My stomach churned as I tried to swallow the humiliation. No one noticed. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. Then, as the conversation over the Maui trip finally began to fade, my mother reached into her purse. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and smoothed it across the tablecloth. The bill. My father leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Quite a celebration we've had," he said proudly. My mother slid the paper across the table until it stopped in front of me. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "We thought you might like to take care of this, Madeline. Since you missed most of the dinner, it would be a nice way to contribute." For a second, I thought it was a joke. My eyes flicked to my sister, waiting for her smirk to break into laughter. But Victoria only raised an eyebrow, smug and expectant. The table fell into silence, all eyes on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced down at the total. Over $1,200. "You want me to pay for a dinner I didn't even eat?" My voice cracked as I spoke, smaller than I intended. "Well, we did reserve a place for you," my father said, as though that explained everything. "And the restaurant charges per person," my mother added smoothly. "Besides, it's not like you have a mortgage or children to support. It seems fair." Victoria chuckled, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, come on, Maddie. Don't act so surprised. You've always been our family ATM." Laughter erupted around the table. Not just hers, but Andrew's, my parents', even my niece and nephew joined in, though they couldn't have understood the joke. My brother-in-law raised his glass. "To Madeline's good fortune, which we all get to share," he said, and the table echoed with clinking glasses. The words hit me like a slap. My face burned, my throat tightened, but beneath the sting there was something else: clarity. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, an aunt. I was a convenience. A walking wallet. The last 3 years of inclusion, the sudden warmth, the invitations, they had all been built on the same fragile currency. My money. I looked at the bill again, the ink blurring as tears stung my eyes. The room spun with laughter, their voices bouncing around me like cruel echoes. Something inside me shifted, sharp and decisive. My hands, surprisingly steady, lifted the paper. I held it firmly between my fingers and began tearing it down the middle. The sound ripped through the room, silencing the laughter. I tore again, and again, until the check was nothing but confetti drifting across the white linen. Gasps filled the air. My mother's hand shot to her chest. "Madeline, what on earth do you think you're doing?" I pushed $300 onto the table, my voice calm, almost cold. "That covers my share. The rest is on all of you." I stood, smoothed down my dress, and picked up my bag. Their eyes followed me, a mixture of shock and fury, but I didn't falter. For the first time in years, I felt steady. I turned toward the door, my heels clicking against the floor, each step louder than the last. Behind me, my father barked my name, my mother's voice cracked with disbelief. My sister scoffed. But I didn't look back. Because I knew, deep in my bones, that this night wasn't just about a bill or a forgotten gift. It was the moment their mask had slipped completely. It was the night I stopped being blind to the truth. My family didn't love me for who I was. They loved me for what I could give. And as I stepped out into the rain once again, the silver-wrapped watches still unopened on the table behind me, I understood that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm I had just unleashed inside that dining room. What came after would test me in ways I wasn't yet ready to imagine. In the days after the anniversary dinner, I carried myself like a woman moving through fog. Every step felt muffled, every sound distant, as though I were watching life play out behind a pane of glass. The image of my family laughing at me, clinking glasses to the toast of my being their ATM, replayed in my mind on a loop so relentless it haunted me even in sleep. I would jolt awake at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, my heart racing, convinced I could still hear the sound of paper tearing in my hands as I shredded that bill into pieces. I cut off all communication. My phone buzzed with calls, but I silenced them. Messages piled up, unread. At first, there were attempts at normalcy, my mother's polite texts about the weather, my father's clipped reminders of family obligations, Victoria's breezy notes about the children. But as I ignored them, the tone shifted. 3 days after the dinner, my mother left me a voicemail. "Your father and I are considering renovating the lake house kitchen. Since you've always had such good taste, maybe you'd like to contribute toward the new appliances. Call me back." A week later, Victoria texted, "Lily's birthday is coming up. She's been eyeing that drawing tablet you once mentioned. I told her you'd probably get it for her. Don't disappoint her." And then, as if twisting the knife, my father wrote, "The Maui trip is next month. Since you ruined the anniversary dinner, your mother thought you might send us some spending money as a gift. Think about it." Each message confirmed what I had been afraid to admit out loud. Nothing had changed. They weren't reaching out to reconcile or apologize. They weren't seeking me, they were seeking my wallet. And the cruelest part was the casualness of it. The way they slipped their demands into everyday conversation, as if it were natural, expected. As if my purpose in the family was not to be loved, but to provide. The silence I imposed was not easy. I had been conditioned for years to believe that belonging meant compliance, that love had to be earned through giving. Without their constant pull on me, I felt both liberated and terrifyingly alone. My evenings stretched quiet and heavy, the absence of texts and calls both a relief and a wound. I found myself pacing my apartment, sometimes picking up the phone only to put it back down. I wanted to hear them say they were sorry. I wanted to hear, for once, that I mattered outside of money. But that call never came. It was during one of those restless nights that I searched online for therapists in Portland who specialized in family dynamics. That's how I found Dr. Leanne Hartman. From the first session, sitting in her softly lit office surrounded by shelves of books and the faint scent of lavender, I felt something crack open inside me. I poured out everything: the lottery win, the endless requests, the humiliation at the anniversary dinner. I admitted to her, in a voice barely more than a whisper, that I was terrified of being alone, terrified that by setting boundaries I had severed the last ties to my family. She listened with quiet attentiveness, then leaned forward and said, "What you're experiencing isn't just anger, Madeline. It's grief. Not only for the relationship you've lost, but for the relationship you always wished you had. You've been mourning a version of your family that never truly existed." Her words lodged deep inside me. For years, I had believed that if I just gave more money, more effort, more of myself, they would finally see me, finally value me. But in truth, I had been bargaining with a fantasy. I had been buying scraps of conditional affection, mistaking them for love. Week after week, Dr. Hartman helped me peel back the layers of guilt that had wrapped themselves around me like chains. She taught me how to recognize manipulation dressed up as obligation, how to differentiate between genuine remorse and the guilt-tripping my family had perfected. Boundaries, she told me, are not punishments. They are acts of love for yourself, and sometimes even for others, if they are willing to grow. It was also during this time that I met Grace Liu. We were introduced at a local art collective event, a gallery show where I had submitted a series of new design pieces. She was a photographer, recently relocated from Chicago, with a sharp eye and a warm laugh. We found ourselves lingering over coffee afterward, swapping stories about creative burnout and the precarious life of freelancers. Eventually, I confessed a sliver of what I was going through. I expected her to respond with the same platitudes I had heard from others. "But they're your family. You'll work it out." Instead, she said something that startled me with its honesty. "My parents cut me off in college when I switched my major from business to photography. They paid tuition only if I agreed to follow their plan. When I refused, the money vanished overnight." Her words hit me like a mirror held up to my own life. The details were different, but the story was the same. Money used not as love, but as control. From then on, Grace became a lifeline. She didn't minimize what I felt. She didn't dismiss my pain with cliches. She understood, in her bones, the betrayal of being valued only for what you could provide. As the weeks turned into months, something inside me began to shift. My phone still lit up occasionally with calls and messages from my family, but I stopped dreading them. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I simply let the silence speak for me. Each time I ignored a message, the guilt loosened its grip, and in its place came something unfamiliar: strength. I poured myself into work again, this time with an energy I hadn't felt in years. Freed from the constant drain of family obligations, I found new inspiration. I took on projects I once would have been too exhausted to accept. My designs grew bolder, my clients more impressed. The art collective offered me opportunities to collaborate, and I found joy in creating not just for money, but for passion. Still, loneliness crept in sometimes. On quiet nights, I would see families laughing together at a restaurant, or I'd overhear coworkers talking about Sunday dinners with their parents. And a pang of longing would pierce through me. I grieved not just the family I had, but the one I had always dreamed they could be. But grief, I learned, doesn't mean weakness. It means you cared. It means you hoped. And in that grief, I found clarity. 3 months after the dinner, my silence had stretched long enough that even my family seemed to realize I was serious. The barrage of calls slowed to a trickle. For the first time in years, I felt as though I could breathe without the constant pressure of their demands. I thought I had reached a turning point, that perhaps the worst was behind me, but I was wrong. Because just as I was learning to steady myself, just as I was beginning to believe in my own strength, a call came that would shake me to my core. A voice on the other end of the line would tell me something that made the laughter at that dinner table feel like child's play in comparison. Something that would turn betrayal into something far darker. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the call came, the kind of morning that should have passed without consequence. I was at my desk, halfway through a new design project for a local startup, sipping coffee that had already gone cold, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it ring out. Unknown numbers often meant telemarketers, robocalls, or wrong numbers. But something in me hesitated, and I pressed accept. "Is this Madeline Parker?" a man's voice asked, calm but carrying a weight that immediately put me on edge. "Yes, this is she," I replied, my hand tightening around the phone. "This is Daniel Brooks, Senior Fraud Officer with Wells Fargo. I need to speak with you regarding some unusual activity tied to your name. Do you have a few minutes to discuss this matter privately?" My blood went cold. Fraud. The word itself seemed to pull the floor from under me. I swiveled in my chair, my project forgotten, and pressed the phone closer. "Yes, of course. What's going on?" He paused, the kind of pause that prepares you for impact. "Our system flagged an attempt to open a new credit line in your name last week. The application listed you as a joint applicant. The primary applicant was identified as Richard Parker." For a moment, I couldn't process it. My mind refused to connect the words. Richard Parker. My father. The man who had raised me, lectured me about responsibility, and worn his integrity like a badge of honor. I think there must be some mistake," I stammered. "My father would never. I didn't authorize any credit line." "I'm afraid the documents submitted contained your personal information," Daniel continued. "Your social security number, date of birth, address, even what appeared to be a copy of your driver's license. The signature, however, did not match verification. That's why the application was denied and flagged for review." I pressed my palm against my forehead, the room tilting around me. Images flooded my mind. Visits to my parents' home, evenings spent in their study. I remembered clearly one night when I had left my document folder unattended while helping my mother in the kitchen. Could that have been when he made copies? The thought turned my stomach. "You're saying my father tried to commit identity theft against me?" My voice cracked on the last word. Daniel's tone softened, but the facts didn't. "Yes, Miss Parker, it's considered identity theft, a criminal offense. This was not the first inquiry in your name flagged by our system. There have been attempts at multiple institutions in the past 2 months." I sat frozen, the words slicing deeper with every revelation. Multiple attempts, not a desperate mistake, not a one-time lapse in judgment. A pattern. My father, systematically trying to drain me, even after I had cut contact. It was betrayal at its most intimate level, not just emotional manipulation, but an assault on the very foundation of trust. "What do I do?" I whispered, almost to myself. He outlined the steps carefully, like a surgeon explaining an operation. "Place a fraud alert on all 3 major credit bureaus. Consider a full credit freeze. Change every password, monitor all accounts, open a secure post office box for sensitive mail. And, Miss Parker, I strongly recommend filing a police report. It's the only way to ensure full protection should further attempts be made." I scribbled notes with shaking hands, the pen barely able to keep up with his instructions. My chest tightened until I thought I might suffocate. Filing a police report meant putting my father's name on record as a criminal. It meant shattering whatever thin threads remained between us. It meant acknowledging fully that the man I had once adored, the man whose approval I had spent a lifetime chasing, was willing to destroy me for money. After we ended the call, I sat on the couch, the phone limp in my hand. The afternoon light streamed golden through the blinds, but I felt none of its warmth. My reflection in the darkened TV screen looked pale, almost unfamiliar. My father's face flashed through my memory, not the man who had just tried to steal from me, but the man who used to drive me to school, who corrected my math homework, who clapped me on the back when I won an art competition as a child. Had that love ever been real? Or had it always been conditional, waiting for the moment when I could be useful to him? I thought back to the dinner, to the laughter at my expense, to the way they had pushed the bill toward me without hesitation. That night had been painful, but this was worse. The dinner revealed what they thought of me. This call revealed what they were willing to do to me. The betrayal hollowed me out, leaving me trembling with a mix of grief and fury. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to call him and demand an explanation. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew what the explanation would be. Excuses, deflections, guilt trips. He would twist it into my fault somehow, as he always had. Instead, I picked up the phone again, but this time I dialed my therapist, Dr. Hartman. My voice was steadier than I expected when she answered. "Something has happened with my father," I said. "Something I don't know how to handle." Even as I spoke, I realized this was no longer about salvaging a relationship or buying affection. This was about survival, about protecting myself from people who had proven they would consume me if I let them. I spent the next hours methodically taking Daniel's advice. I froze my credit, changed my passwords, set up alerts on every account. Each step felt both empowering and devastating, like reinforcing the locks on a house I once called home. And then came the hardest step, writing the email. I sat at my desk, fingers hovering over the keys, the words forming in my mind like a verdict. I would tell them exactly what I knew, exactly what had been attempted, and draw a line that could never be crossed again. As I typed, I realized that this wasn't just about fraud or money, it was about naming the truth out loud. My family wasn't safe for me. They weren't a refuge. They were a threat. I hit send, the message firing into cyberspace like a flare in the night. My hands shook as I pushed the laptop away. The silence afterward was deafening, the kind of silence that comes when you know a storm is about to break. Because no matter how they responded, nothing would ever be the same again. And I could already feel the weight of their denial, their anger, their attempts to twist the story back on me. I had finally called out their betrayal, and now I would have to face whatever firestorm followed. When my mother called me 3 days after I sent the email, I almost didn't answer. I stared at the phone ringing on the counter, my chest tightening with the familiar tug of guilt and dread. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to keep my silence intact. But something in her voice, softer than I remembered when she left the message, "Please, Madeline, just you and me, no one else," compelled me to pick up. Against my therapist's advice, against my own instincts, I agreed to meet her at a cafe near my apartment. The morning of the meeting, I got there early. The cafe was small, tucked on the corner of a quiet street, its windows fogged with steam from the espresso machines. I chose a table in the back with a clear view of the door and the exit only a few feet away. My latte sat cooling on the table, untouched, as I rehearsed what I would say if she tried to minimize, to excuse, to beg for money again. My pulse thrummed in my ears, a steady reminder that this was no ordinary conversation. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. My mother had always carried herself with a certain poise, hair perfectly styled, clothes pressed, a kind of polished armor that told the world she was in control. But that morning she looked smaller, diminished. Her posture sagged, her blouse slightly wrinkled, her face paler than I had ever seen it. She spotted me instantly, hesitation flickering in her eyes before she crossed the room and slid into the chair across from me. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice low, almost fragile. She fiddled with the paper napkin, folding and unfolding it, as though the motion kept her steady. I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to feel the weight of the silence, the shift in power between us. For once, I wasn't rushing to make her comfortable. I simply waited. "What your father did," she swallowed, her hands trembling slightly. "I need you to know I had no idea. I would never have condoned it." My chest tightened with anger. "But you condoned treating me like a bank account for years. You laughed when they called me the family ATM. You slid that anniversary bill across the table as if it was nothing." She flinched, pain flashing across her face. For a moment, I thought she might retreat into excuses, but instead, she nodded. "You're right. I did. We all did. And I'm sorry, Madeline. Truly sorry." The words landed heavily between us. I had imagined hearing them for years, dreamed of what it might feel like, but instead of relief, I felt suspicion. I studied her face, searching for the usual performance, the strategic guilt, but something in her eyes stopped me. They were wet, glassy, and unguarded in a way I wasn't used to seeing. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended, a blade honed by years of disappointment. "Do you want me to forgive him? To bail you out again?" She shook her head firmly, almost desperately. "No, I'm telling you because you deserve the truth. Your father." Her voice cracked, and she pressed the napkin to her lips. "He has a problem. He's been gambling for years." I pretended not to see it. It was easier that way. But the truth is, we're drowning. The renovations, the vacations, the lifestyle, it's all built on debt. We've refinanced the house twice. The credit cards are maxed. And when you won that money, we saw it as an answer. A way to patch the holes. We didn't see you. We saw a solution. Her confession sliced through me, leaving both fury and grief in its wake. Suddenly, the years of subtle pressure, the endless requests, the entitlement, it all made sense. They hadn't just been selfish, they had been desperate, covering a rot they didn't want the world to see. I stared at her, my throat dry. "So I wasn't your daughter, I was your lifeline." Tears filled her eyes. She shook her head. "No, you've always been my daughter. I lost sight of that. I measured you by the wrong things. I wanted you to be like Victoria, to have the kind of life that looked safe, that looked impressive. But you chose differently, and instead of celebrating that, I belittled it. And then when the money came, I clung to it because it kept us afloat. I'm ashamed, Madeline. Ashamed of what I allowed." Her words cracked something inside me. For the first time, she wasn't making excuses. She wasn't telling me to be less dramatic, or to get over it. She was admitting fault, laying bare the ugliness she had tried to hide. And yet, I couldn't let go of my anger. Not yet. "What about Victoria? Does she know?" "I tried to tell her," my mother said softly. "But she doesn't want to hear it. She's built her entire identity on being part of this perfect family. Acknowledging the truth would mean unraveling that. She refuses to face it." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe, hissing milk steamers, clinking cups, low chatter filling the space between us. I watched her wipe at her eyes, and I wondered if this was the first time she had allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. Finally, I spoke. "I can't have contact with Dad right now. What he did, stealing my identity, that's beyond repair. Maybe someday, if he gets help, maybe things could change. But not now." She nodded, accepting it without argument. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I wanted you to hear the truth from me, and I wanted you to know that I am trying to change. I've joined a support group for families of gambling addicts. I'm learning about codependency, about enabling. I don't want to keep living in denial." Her words hung in the air, fragile but real. For the first time in years, I believed she might mean them. But I also knew better than to trust blindly. "I need boundaries," I said firmly. "I can have a relationship with you, but it will be on my terms. I will not provide financial support of any kind. That is non-negotiable. And it will take time for me to believe that what you're saying is real." Her shoulders sagged with relief, as though even that conditional acceptance was more than she had hoped for. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give." As we parted, she reached for my hand, but I pulled back gently. "I wasn't ready, not yet." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and walked out into the gray morning light. I sat there long after she left, staring at the half-empty latte in front of me. My chest was heavy with conflicting emotions, anger, grief, cautious hope. I knew this wasn't a resolution. It was only the beginning of something unsteady, fragile, and uncertain. And though I wanted to believe her, to believe that change was possible, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest truths were still waiting in the shadows, truths I hadn't yet uncovered, but soon would. The weeks after that cafe meeting with my mother felt like walking on ground that had just stopped shaking after an earthquake. Nothing was stable yet, but the dust had settled enough for me to see where the cracks ran deepest. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending myself into the shape my family demanded. I wasn't wiring money, covering bills, or cushioning their mistakes. I was standing on my own 2 feet, shaky but firm, insisting on boundaries that had never existed before. My mother and I began talking once a week, usually on Sunday evenings. The conversations were cautious at first, circling around safe topics, recipes, the weather, a book she had picked up at her support group. She never asked me for money again, not once. It was as if she knew even the slightest hint of expectation would send me retreating back into silence. And so she stayed careful, respectful, like someone trying not to spook a wild animal. At times I resented it. Why had it taken so much devastation, so much betrayal, for her to finally see me? Why had I needed to draw a line in blood before she decided to treat me like a person instead of a resource? The bitterness came in waves, but I forced myself to acknowledge it rather than drown in it. Dr. Hartman reminded me in therapy, anger is part of healing. You don't have to forgive on their timeline. You get to decide what trust looks like now. I clung to that advice when Victoria finally reached out. Her text was blunt. Mom said you've been overreacting. But maybe we were a little thoughtless about the money stuff. Can we just move on? Move on. As though years of being used could be brushed away like crumbs on a table. My first instinct was to ignore her, but something in me wanted closure. I wrote back, I'm not interested in moving on. I'm interested in moving differently. If you want a relationship, it can't be based on what I give you. It has to be mutual. She never replied. And maybe that was answer enough. Meanwhile, my father remained silent. Not a word, not a text, not a half-hearted apology. I later heard through my mother that he had finally entered treatment for his gambling addiction. That news landed with a dull thud in my chest. Part of me wanted to hope for his recovery, but another part couldn't forget that he had tried to steal my identity. He wasn't just a flawed man with an addiction. He had crossed a line so sharp and unforgivable that any path back to me would take more than treatment. It would take accountability. And accountability was something my father had never known how to face. So I rebuilt without him. My work became a source of renewal. I poured the energy I once wasted on guilt and obligation into projects that stretched me creatively. I accepted collaborations I would have turned down before, afraid of being too busy for family dinners or last-minute emergencies. My designs grew bolder, infused with the intensity of someone finally creating for herself, not as a distraction from pain but as a declaration of independence. For the first time, I began to feel proud of my work in a way that didn't require anyone else's approval. And outside of work, I leaned on the connections that truly mattered. Grace became not just a friend but a confidant, the kind of person who answered the phone at midnight when the loneliness threatened to suffocate me. She invited me into her world photography walks through downtown Portland, late-night editing sessions, impromptu road trips to the coast. She reminded me, without ever saying it outright, that family could be chosen, that love didn't have to come with strings attached. Still, rebuilding on new terms wasn't neat or easy. The holidays tested me most. That first Thanksgiving after the dinner, my mother invited me to join them, promising it would just be her, Victoria, and the kids. I almost said yes, craving the familiarity of tradition. But then I remembered the way they had laughed at me, glasses raised in mockery. I remembered the bills sliding across the table, the words family ATM echoing like a curse, and I said no. Instead, I went to Grace's apartment, where a small group of artists crammed around a mismatched table, laughing over burnt stuffing and store-bought pie. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Christmas was harder. My mother sent a package, a scarf she said she had knit herself. I touched the yarn, soft against my skin, and for a moment I allowed myself to imagine her hands working the needles, stitch by stitch. But alongside the gift came a card. We miss you. Your father is trying. Don't stay away too long. The words cut deep. They were both a plea and a manipulation, a reminder of the gap between us. I placed the scarf in my drawer, folded neatly, but couldn't bring myself to wear it. As winter turned to spring, I noticed a change within myself. The guilt that had once been a constant companion now only appeared in fleeting moments, like a ghost fading in daylight. In its place grew something sturdier: self-respect. Each week that I held my boundaries, each day I refused to bend back into old patterns, I felt stronger. I began to understand that I didn't have to earn love through sacrifice, that my worth wasn't measured by what I could provide. But strength didn't erase the ache. Some nights, lying awake in the quiet of my apartment, I still wondered what it would feel like to have a family that saw me for who I was. I grieved not only the relationships I had lost, but the ones I never truly had to begin with. And grief, I learned, doesn't end, it transforms. 1 year after the infamous anniversary dinner, I marked the date alone. I booked a table for one at a small restaurant in the city, ordered my favorite dish, and raised a glass of champagne. Not to them, not to us, to myself, to survival, to boundaries, to the long, painful road of learning that I was enough. But even in that moment of fragile peace, I knew my story with my family wasn't over. Boundaries could protect me, but they couldn't erase the ties of blood. And though I had rebuilt my life on new terms, the past still lingered like a shadow just beyond the light. Because families, even broken ones, have a way of circling back. And deep down, I sensed the next test was coming, a moment that would force me once again to decide how much of myself I was willing to give, and how much I was finally ready to walk away from forever. 1 year later, I look back at that night in Napa as the fracture that split my life into a before and an after. For months, the memory burned like a wound: my family's laughter, the bill sliding across the table, the cruel nickname that stripped me down to nothing more than a wallet with a pulse. But with time, I've realized something important. What felt like the end was actually the beginning. That dinner wasn't just the night I walked away from them, it was the night I finally walked toward myself. The year that followed was not easy. Silence weighed heavily at first. Holidays felt like cliffs I had to climb alone. But as I honored my boundaries, I discovered strength I didn't know I had. I learned that I could survive without their approval, without their constant demands, without their conditional love. I began to fill my life with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give. I poured my energy into work that excited me, friendships that sustained me, and moments of solitude that healed me. If there's one lesson I want to share from this journey, it's this: boundaries are not walls to shut people out, they are doors to let the right people in. Saying no doesn't make you unkind. Refusing to be used doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. And wholeness, I've learned, is the foundation of any relationship worth keeping. Family, I've discovered, isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose, the ones who listen without judgment, who show up when it's inconvenient, who see you as enough even when you're not giving them anything. That realization freed me more than money ever could. Now, when I think about my parents, my sister, and the years of manipulation, I don't feel the same raw anger. There's grief, yes, but also gratitude for the clarity, for the courage it forced me to build, for the chance to finally live on my own terms. I've stopped trying to buy love, because I've learned the kind of love worth having can never be bought. If my story resonates with you, I hope it reminds you of this truth: your worth is not measured by what you provide, but by who you are. You are enough, exactly as you are. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this journey. If my story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear these words, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and growth. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a boundary with someone you love, even when it hurt? What did you learn about yourself in the process?